effect. And this is quite different to the Criminal Procedure Act, which only deals with adults. So the Child Justice Act is specifically made to deal with children. So children who commit sexual offences are dealt with under the Child Justice Act.
Mm-hmm. All right. Okay. So what factors causes children to become sexual offenders?
So it might be, it's definitely different factors. Either children have seen something and then they go and act it out at school, or children have experienced sexual offences and then they go and mimic it or do it to somebody else or other children. But it's different factors. So what happens when a child has allegedly committed a sexual offense? He will be arrested under the Child Justice Act. But detention is always a last resort. So with the Child Justice Act, they say that you have 48 hours to do a assessment and preliminary inquiry, where a probation officer, which is a social worker, has to investigate and actually investigate the factors of the child. So the child's life, the family life, the circumstances around the commission of the crime, and then produce a report that she will then bring to the magistrate, in order for the magistrate to kind of have a picture of the child that they are dealing with specifically.
Mm-hmm. The ages are getting younger and younger. We're no longer just seeing adolescents, but younger children from the ages of 8 years and 10. Do they also get arrested?
So with regard to the age, we have criminal liability. So in order to charge someone of a crime, the one factor is criminal liability, and you cannot be charged with a crime at the moment when you're under 10, but the age of criminal liability is being raised to 12. And that is because you do not have the cognitive kind of intellect to actually determine that this is right or wrong. So children under 10, yes, you're right. Children are partaking in certain activities. Children are being perpetrators of sexual offences against other children. But in those cases, you do not arrest a child. Usually when it happens in school and it's seen by a teacher, the parents are called, the case will be opened at the police station, but the child is never arrested. The child goes home. And then the preliminary inquiry, for example, happens. But then if a child is under the age of 10, then the probation officer still has to come in and investigate, but there will be no criminal charges laid against that child. But then the child will have to, after the investigation, the child will have to then go through either classes or counseling. For example, at the Teddy Bear Clinic, the Teddy Bear Clinic deals with child victims of sexual offences and child perpetrators. And the National Institute of Crime Prevention and Rehabilitation of Offenders, NICRO, also assists with the rehabilitation. So children under 10 would have to go on some not rigorous, but basically some rehabilitation, kind of to get to the root of why the child is doing this. If the child is then found to be in need of care and protection, for example, if the child is a victim themselves of sexual offences, then the child will be referred to the children's court so that the child can either be removed from the home if the perpetrator is in the home, or the child is then, but there are all these mechanisms in place to kind of try and rehabilitate children and kind of come to their rescue if they are also in need of rescuing. But with the Child Justice Act, if it's a child over 10 years old and the child, through the preliminary inquiry, it's found that the child is a repeat offender, the child has been diverted for a previous crime but then committed this one, and the child is then a danger to society, then it will take the normal course of criminal proceedings under the Child Justice Act.
All right. And I'm sure the question on many people's minds at the moment is, do young sexual offenders become adult sexual offenders?
So I'll kind of take from the reports I've seen from the Teddy Bear Clinic, and kind of, because they also go around kind of teaching and kind of informing the communities about kind of what all of this entails, the rehabilitation. And it's not a guarantee that a child offender will then become an adult offender. And that is why it is important to kind of deal with the child under the Child Justice Act, whether the child gets diverted out of the system. Maybe it's found that it was the first time offense and the child is remorseful and the child has actually, maybe he was compelled to do this and then they get diverted out of the system. Or if they get sentenced to a child and youth care center where they can receive an education, they can get the rehabilitation and the therapy that they require. It's not actually a guarantee that a child offender will then be an adult sexual offender. But you do have those cases where a child is so far gone that the court at that time when they're sentencing this child, they can see that this child is quite dangerous. And under those circumstances, the child will go on the National Sex Offenders Register. And then they will never be able to work around children or with people with mental disability.
And speaking about the list, the National Sex Offenders Register, will this be children of all age groups under the age of 18?
No. So the prosecutor must provide compelling reasons as to why a child must be placed on the register. Yes. Right. So they must, and taking into account the report by the probation officer and what the magistrate has also kind of encountered through the trial itself, that will be the determining factor.
Are there any laws that protect the offenders?
No. So I won't say that there are laws that protect the offender. So the Child Justice Act is aimed at protecting the rights of a child in conflict with the law, whatever the crime is. So it states that a child can't be treated more harshly than an adult. Hence, we have the Child Justice Act. But while implementing the Child Justice Act, you also have to look at the rights of the victim. So it's basically just a constitutional right to have a fair trial and not to be detained arbitrarily. So all the constitutional rights have kind of been embodied in the Child Justice Act, but it's not necessarily just to protect the offender. The child victim also is center stage, even though the state is the other party. So it's the state versus the offender.
Wow, it's just so sad reading up on child sex offenders, and it's too much. I mean, there's nobody there's really nothing you can do. There's no one you can blame because such things. I'm lost for words.
No, it's definitely understandable, and that's why we need these mechanisms. So not just for child sexual offenders, but for all crimes. For all crimes, children they commit petty crimes, they commit more serious crimes. But what the state then does, because we've moved away from just merely punishing a person, we are trying to also rehabilitate so that this person can be reintegrated back into society. So depending on what provisions or what happens to the child once they're in the system, it actually determines whether the child can successfully be reintegrated back into society or not. So it's important that it's not a slap on the wrist. The child still does the time, but the child has to get the professional assistance. So if they need a psychologist, if they need a psychiatrist, and that's why we have child and youth care centers and psychologists involved and probation officers to make sure that maybe if the child comes from a neighborhood or an area that the crime is rife, that one of the things that the child learns is that there is an alternative to this life, but you have to work hard for it.
I'm glad that we do have places like the Teddy Bear Clinic that can step in to assist both the child and the victims. I mean, we hear about stories of child offenders, and they just stay in the media for a short period of time, and then the next thing they disappear. Why would that be the case? Why would these stories just appear and then be gone the next moment? Is it try to protect the children, or what could be the case?
So there is a provision in the Criminal Procedure Act that says one cannot publish the identity of a child victim of a crime, a child witness to a crime, and a child offender. So the child offender is protected under that provision, as well as victims and witnesses, and that is because you can, as a journalist or as somebody trying to report on the story, you can report on the facts of the story, but you have to anonymize the child specifically in the case in order to minimize kind of the secondary damage that might occur. So, for example, if I'm a child offender and then I commit the crime, I was 13, I'm sentenced to 5 years in a child and youth care center. This provision protects my identity from being revealed, in that I can also kind of immerse myself in all the assistance that I'm getting. Aside from being kind of detained for 5 years, I can immerse myself. I can also know that once I come out, I won't just have this cloud over me that at some point somebody's going to be like, there's that person who committed that crime against that person and be exposed. So it's kind of that protective mechanism that's there. So you cannot reveal the identity of a child offender, victim, or witness to a crime.
All right. And lastly, once they are on the National Sex Registry, or Sex Offenders Registry, rather, how long do they remain on there?
So it's a lifetime. It's a lifetime, but if you have compelling reasons as to why you should be removed, I think after 10 years, but I'm not sure. So that's why I know it's a lifetime, but that's why a prosecutor has to have compelling reason as to why a child must be placed on the register.
All right.
And then the magistrate kind of,
All right. No problem. Thank you so much for your time, Lila Letemba.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that was Lita Letemba Stwai, who is an attorney for the Center of Child Law, just taking us through what happens to child sex offenders. I know it's something that is so difficult to grasp. It's something that's so difficult to live with, knowing that there are other children out there who are offenders, who abuse their peers, their friends. And as a parent, you wonder if your child could end up being such a person. But we have places like the Teddy Bear Clinic who step up to assist both the victims as well as the offender by offering rehabilitation to the offenders, by offering advice, psychology, taking them through a treatment program so as to make them better people who can integrate in society and avoid the issue of becoming adult offenders, because we would not want to add to the numbers. As it is, the numbers are already very high. No official statistics on this issue are reported. However, there is some data from localized studies that may provide us with some indications in the relation to this matter. Statistics from the Child Protection Unit in the East Metropole area in Cape Town from 2000 to 2002 show that 23% of persons arrested for sexual offenses were under 18. Yeah, 23%. I guess the numbers were still too high back then, and we don't know at the moment how much it is standing at. But let us try as much as possible to protect our children, and not just to protect them from other child offenders, but to protect them from becoming offenders as well. If you have any comments, questions, queries, or suggestions, please leave them in the comments section below. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and send them to us on WhatsApp. The number is 061 766 0355. Please stay with us. We will be right back.
You are listening to Mariam Makwanda live on Salam Media. Osman